Good evening and welcome to the Cupertino Planning Commission for Tuesday, February 11th, 2020. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And let's start with the roll call from the Community Development Director, Ben Fu.
Yes, ma'am. Commissioner Saxena?
Present.
Commissioner Fung?
Present.
Commissioner Takahashi?
Here.
Chairperson Moore?
Present.
Vice Chair Wong is not here tonight.
So we'll begin with item 1, approval of the minutes. Let's take a moment to review the minutes. I move that we approve the minutes of the January 28th, 2020 meeting. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Let's start the vote.
There's a end vote button.
Let's do next item.
Save vote.
There we go. Okay, so the motion carries with 3 yes, 1 abstention, and 1 absent. The next portion of the meeting is oral communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the Commission on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. In most cases, state law will prohibit the Commission from making any decisions with respect to a matter not on the agenda. Our first speaker is Luke Lang.
Hi, good evening, Planning Commission and staff. There's a general misconception, a very bad misconception, that developers can violate the general plan and or municipal code through various waivers and concessions and things like that, just because they're building below market rate housing. Okay, so it doesn't make sense to many of us, and I have, with some help, I got some material that I would like to share with the Planning Commission. Can I get the overhead, please? Okay, so I'm gonna talk about density bonus waiver does not mean unlimited height, okay? And I apologize for a typo. My autocorrect didn't seem to kick in or didn't detect. So there's a general plan envelope that's described by the general plan. A development plan without any BMR units must fit within the general plan, okay? And that includes density, height, setback, and et cetera. So once you do that, then when you add on the BMR units, that can push you beyond the height, density, setback, and things like that. That's where the waivers really kick in. So this is what that means, and it does not mean a total disregard of the general plan. So San Francisco Planning Department did a study on state density bonus law overview, and there is the, I'll hand this to you guys later on. There's the website, and specifically on page 12, they talk about this whole concept of envelope. So here on top in the middle, this is what the maximum allowed development without the BMR units. And then once that fits inside the general plan, then you can go ahead below left is where they're adding in more units, higher density than required. And the bottom right, it shows increasing the height to accommodate the BMR units. Okay? But the starting point is right there where a development must fit within the general plan. So let's take a look at how this affects the Westport development. What I'm showing here is the building 1. Their plan on the left-hand side shows 6 stories and all the units and the various height. And notice that the total height is 91 feet, whereas our general plan allows 45 feet there. So now if we were to, is that time?
15 seconds.
Oh, yeah. So if we were to keep that at 45 feet, then 91 of the market housing unit doesn't fit in building 1, and you put them in building 2, and still 70 units don't fit, and therefore they start off by not violating the general plan without the BMR units. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Lisa Warren.
Thank you. So I did not realize Luke was going to be talking about some of this stuff, but I'm going to breeze through some things so I don't run out of my time. As I understand it, a project needs to comply with local standards prior to adding density bonus units, which I think is what Luke was illustrating or speaking of. I have references and I have copies of this for all of you. So you can refer to them when you have a discussion at some point. But there are references from the Cupertino Municipal Code and state density bonus law that support that, the way I see it. A development must first demonstrate that the base project complies with the local zoning, setback, height, and other local requirements prior to requesting the concessions, incentives, or waivers. City Council needs to make, this is my request, findings on the density bonus units being compliant with the law. It's actually not just a request, it's what they should be doing. So please hold a study session on density bonus as shown in, I think it's attachment 2 of this agenda, which maybe I don't need to talk about because I'm in oral, but there's mention to study session, and I would like to ask that it be a joint session with Planning Commission and City Council. I think they're far more productive. And the general plan amendment process in general also is, sorry, I didn't put that up high enough. Comments I have about that. It needs to be very clear if and when a general plan amendment can be refused by the Planning Commission, and maybe refused is not the right word, after it has been passed through the gate by City Council. Are there no normal checks and balances? Does anything go once the City Council allows a project through the gate? Because in listening to discussions at that point in the process, I sometimes feel like it does, and it shouldn't. Please hold a joint study session on the general plan amendment process also, because I think there's still, you guys are doing a great job of going over all this, but I think there's still just so many unanswered questions and so many new things being thrown at us that it's hard to keep up, but it's so very important that you do keep up. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
You know what, I have a little time. Community benefits, or so they're called, but they're not actually in our general plan. In general, I think you all know, I'm not comfortable with the term community benefits. I have stated in the past and given documentation that city surveys have shown that residents do not look favorably at this Wild West bargaining, which often backfires. We've seen many examples of community benefits being a big goose egg for us, and quite frankly, a game. Are they even equitable across projects? I say no, they're not. And I think 2 recent projects have shown they're not equitable, but I'm out of time, so I can't tell you why.
Thank you, Lisa. So, do we have any written communications? Okay, and there are no.
We do not.
Okay, thank you. And there are no items on consent calendar. So we move on to item 2, old business. Subject the general plan, annual review, and implementation plan, and to consider general plan policies and strategies that could benefit from clarification. Continued from the January 28th, 2020 meeting. Recommended action that the Planning Commission, 1, provide additional direction on the format and content of the General Plan Annual Review Implementation Plan. That's attachment 1. And 2, consider general plan policies and strategies that could benefit from clarification, attachment 2. So we have the staff report and the general plan 2019 annual report, and item 2, the general plan comments which were updated January 21st, 2020. So we'll begin with the staff report.
Good evening, Planning Commission. I'm getting pretty good at this presentation. So once again, as a reminder, the General Plan Annual Update is a requirement under state law. It is used to monitor progress in the implementation of action items in the General Plan. And it could alternatively also be used to identify work program items for the city to implement some of those General Plan action items. In addition to the General Plan Annual Review, there is another portion of it, which is the housing element update and review. This update is provided on forms that are required by the HCD. HCD prepares these forms, and we provide the data as inputs into those forms. From prior PC study sessions, we have incorporated changes with format changes. We added comment columns. We added status and time frame indicators. We also verified certain comments related to the Valco Shopping District. We also looked at we added development allocations to certain strategies related to citywide development allocations. We also added comments to policies related to, I believe, 12.1 hillsides, and also to the Valco Shopping District special area to add the current allocation balances to that specific special area as well. In addition, we added notes regarding the lack of landscape easements and building setbacks on the east side of North Dianza special area, and also at the Homestead Square Shopping Center and the Homestead Lane sites in the Homestead special area. In addition, at the Bub Road special area, we added a note regarding the EDSP and the possible designation of an innovation district in the Bub Road area. And for the other non-residential / mixed-use special areas, we added a note regarding the possible redevelopment at the Bate Brothers site. We also updated the number of building permits issued, which are, there's a slight typo in the attachment A, but it is actually 74 accessory dwelling units that were approved since 2014. And the Planning Commission, at its last meeting, reviewed through policies HE 2.3.2, and they had considered looking at these in sections, so that's where the Planning Commission is in terms of its review. In addition to the review of the general plan policies and status, the City Council also authorized the Planning Commission to look at policies that might need clarification. And as a result, based on the suggestions from the Planning Commission, an attachment was prepared, which is attachment 2 as part of your packet. And with that, I wrap up my presentation, and I'm happy to answer questions and go through attachment A.
I was wondering if we could look at attachment 2, if we could pull that up on the screen. Okay, and if we scroll down to the bottom, so I think this is kind of in keeping with the oral communications comments that we received. Item 1, conduct a study session regarding density bonus law. I believe City Council also requested this, so this should be something that's coming in the works, right?
Yes, Chair, we're looking at dates right now to see if we can conduct a joint session.
Great. And I did have a question because there was a change to P zoning in the municipal code. So if you had an applicant who had submitted their application before this change happened, what would happen? Do they have to conform to the new P zoning requirements? What happens when, and we're making these other changes too?
It depends on the project and where it is in the review process. If it is a project that already has a completeness letter to let it know that it is complete and it meets the city's, standards from that time, then only those rules that were in effect at the time that a letter of completeness was issued are applicable to that particular project.
And just to clarify, that's submission complete.
Correct, submission complete, and that they've addressed certain rounds of comments, big picture comments.
Okay, so did anyone have some comments about this attachment here before we move on to looking at the general plan policies and strategies? So we're good to move on to, that would be attachment 1, the general plan annual report. I believe we're looking at policy HE 1.1, is that correct?
Last time the commission went through all the way through HE 2.3.2.
Okay, so further 2.3.2. Okay, great. So why don't we look, page by page? So this finishes up. Let's see, this would be page 31 of our packet. So if anyone has some comments on this strategy HE 2.3.2, if not, I have a couple of comments.
So not to interrupt your train of thought, but HE 2.3.2 was completed, so we would start at 2.3.3.
Okay, good. So we're at 2.3.3, okay. Well, with regards to housing affordability, and this really kind of is more of a housing commission comment, but there was a presentation from the Housing Trust of Silicon Valley and the Santa Clara County for first-time homebuyer loans, and it was something that I'd hoped would go to City Council as a presentation. So for purchasers of a property that was less than $800,000, there was some subsidizing that you could qualify for under Measure A. And last year, I believe, maybe only 16 applicants were in the program. So it was something I think that we could advertise more locally. And I did hear some feedback, well, there's not a lot of property in Cupertino, which is under 800,000. However, in the region, there is. In the county, there is property. And if if people have, family members who are able to, buy into something more local, then it does keep someone from traveling from, Merced into the Bay Area. So I think there is a valid reason that we want to, share this information. And you do mention it here, the first-time homebuyer assistance loans. So I'm hoping that maybe as a study session for City Council, that this could move up from Housing Commission to the City Council, and so more of the public is aware of it.
So you're suggesting that the presentation from the Housing Trust Silicon Valley be made at the City Council?
Correct. I mean, we could do it here, but I think you're going to get more coverage if it goes straight to City Council.
You can take that feedback back.
Just had a minor comment on 2.3.3 in the comment section. So, I generally wouldn't make any comment about the text, the general plan text. In the comment section, you can update the first couple lines, I think.
Being reviewed in 2019, that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that actually there was a Nexus study since then, so it was related to, let's see, what was that? It was supporting material for the BMR.
There's a BMR linkage fee study.
Linkage fee, yeah.
That's a current effort.
Yeah. Okay. So, I don't know whether that's it jumped out because it was on the very first item.
Sure. So I would actually recommend that we leave that there for now, since the study is still being reviewed. I know it says being reviewed in 2019 and it'll continue on in 2020, so we'll update that.
Yeah.
There was some effort to increase the 15% to 20%. Is that still in process?
That's part of the BMR linkage fee study.
Okay, great. Okay, so do we have any more comments on this page? So we're going to move on. I did have a question on housing affordability strategy HE 2.3.7. It's more of a clarification where it says it's about a little bit more than halfway down. A density bonus of up to 20% must be granted to projects that contain one of the following. The project is a senior citizen housing development, no affordable units required. I've been reading about this, the senior citizen housing development. To my knowledge, it needs to be entirely senior citizen housing, so it couldn't be like some senior citizen and then some market rate. That's
right. This is just the policy. We would still have to adhere with state law.
all right. Thank you. Okay, does anyone have some comments on this page, or can we move on? Okay, we're going to move on to the next. So we are at strategy HE 2.3.8. Any comments on this page? Okay, so we're moving on. And next page, we're at the maintaining existing housing stock policy HE 3.3. I did have a question on strategy HE 3.3.2. One housing project, Bearden Drive, 8 units. Would somebody be able to describe that? I'm unfamiliar with it.
My understanding is that the current agreements that are in place for keeping that particular unit are due to expire in 2023, I believe. And so this is just a strategy. We had to, as part of the housing element, identify how we would try to preserve at-risk housing units, and this was one that was identified as being at risk. And the strategy specifically addresses that particular development.
Specifically, it's at risk because...
Because the property owner may or may not wish to continue it as a...
It's the termination, the deed restriction will
the
run
deed
out
was,
at
yeah,
that time.
All right, thank you. Oh, and then on HE 3.3.3, it mentions the rental vacancy rate in Cupertino and adjacent areas if it's less than 5% at the time. And I was wondering what the current rental vacancy rate is now. Would you know that?
It's fairly low. It generally around, in our area, it's been hovering around 2 to 3%. This is codified in our municipal code, actually, the provision of how you would convert something from an apartment building to a condo. And we've had it done once because there was a development that did wish to convert to a condominium complex, and I don't believe it met that threshold.
Thank you.
So I actually had to comment on 3.3.2. You know, that this passage of the general plan was, the first half of it is very, very targeted at that one particular project. But the second half is actually talking about it in general, and I think that there's actually an issue in general where the deed restriction for BMR housing on a number of the properties is running in the next, in the next 10 years. So I would just suggest that certainly from the standpoint of the Bearden Drive project, this is not an action item, but I think that the looking at the when the supply of housing is changing, it's actually quite radical. I mean, I think that the 10 or 12-year plan would actually take out almost 1/3 of the existing BMR units. So I would actually, I think that that's something that would be appropriate as an action item for study, even though it's not immediately pressing.
And yes, but the city can't require, we can incentivize people to renew their agreements, but we can't require it unless they do redevelop. Right. Our current requirement is a 99-year agreement, which generally rolls over, but the original agreements were only for 35 years. Yeah. And so those are the ones that are coming up on termination.
Right, I think that was notable at the time when the Hamptons was making their application. I think the fact that they had actually made a point of the fact that they actually had maybe 10 years left on theirs, or not even that long.
12 years left
12
on
years,
theirs, yeah.
So, I would just say that this is something that it is actually worthy of, I think it's worthy of staff effort to track that. I know they do that in the housing, housing department, but.
Absolutely.
Could we go back to the Hamptons for a moment? Are you saying there's 12 years left?
No, yeah, something like that. On the original deed restriction.
Okay, so what is the new development agreement saying? Because that is for 10 years, right? And we're how many years into it? And then I'm wondering, does that mean I'm just wondering how the clock is going to run out on these units.
So there were originally 34 units at the Hamptons that were good from 1995 through, 35 years or so. So those were all rolled over. Eventually, the city negotiated a deal for 71 or 72 units, of which some were low income and some were moderate income units. And so, but they are now in their 4th year of their DA right now, and it's a 10-year DA. So it's due to expire in 2026, is my understanding.
That's true, but the deed restriction wouldn't start until the units were constructed.
Correct. So the 34 existing units could expire. Well, they wouldn't. There'd still be 2 years left before the DA expires.
So I think that was actually, I attended the Hamptons hearing, and that was actually one of the community benefits that was being offered in that negotiation was that they were going to continue the existing units, as part, along with the new units that were being added.
Correct.
Yeah.
So when the new units are built, will they be at the 55 years?
We'd have to look at it, but my understanding is it would be at the 99 years.
Oh, okay.
That's correct. Also, too, is in the event if and when the DA does expire and the project comes back, you will be looking at a higher percentage of BMR requirements, too. So the city is not going to lose out on any BMR units in this case.
Okay, good. Great. Thank you. Are there any further comments on this page?
Actually, just going back to the Hamptons, was it 906? What was the total quantity of units in the?
942. So the
942.
net new of 600.
So I believe we're on strategy HE 3.3.4, is that correct? Okay. So I was wondering about strategy HE 3.3.5. The city will continue to encourage and sponsor neighborhood and community cleanup campaigns for both public and private properties. It seemed that there, at some point, there was a financial incentive to do this. Is there anything like that still going on? Or is it something that we want to consider for some neighborhood cleanup campaigns or landscape improvements, anything like that?
I would have to look into the financial incentives portion. I honestly do not know. I'm not aware. But in general, there are community cleanup efforts that the Public Works Environmental Programs Division spearheads. We also have the garage sale, the neighborhood garage, the citywide garage sale as well, and which kind of supports this policy as well. But in terms of a specific thing where we financially sponsor something, I am not aware of that, and I'm happy to find out more.
Right. I think it was something, fairly small, like $300, if I recall correctly. But it was some time ago. Yes, if you could look at that, I think that'd be great. And then for strategy HE 4.1.1 and also 4.1.2, I think that the reach codes could be included in that. They are mentioned lower down in 5.1.2. And I was wondering if we happen to have a permeable driveway incentive for a conversion. I think I've heard something about that. Just to change from concrete to pavers and the permeable surface.
I can check in with the Sustainability Division because that's where that would be.
All right, thank you. And further, there's a mention of BQ zoning. It says this would be strategy HE 5.1.1, the city will continue to facilitate housing opportunities for special needs persons by allowing emergency shelters as a permitted use in the BQ quasi-public zoning district. Where would that be?
It's pretty much where all the churches are.
Tangential comment. So along 280, I think I want to say, boy. Well, I guess the question is, 280 on the south side, there seems to be where the trail is planned, there has been homeless encampment that has sprouted, if you will. So seems like it's a good test for our policies with regard to these types of services, and so how do we see results in terms of those intentions turning into actions, I guess you could say?
So the city is looking at solutions for homelessness in general. It is looking to see whether there are certain action items that are coming out of a study related to homelessness, and those could be policies and programs that support not having those type of encampments. One of the things that is being looked at is a emergency overnight car parking requirements.
This item is potentially listed for as an item for next year fiscal year's work program. So we'll have an opportunity to study that and work with the county and come up with a plan. So we'll bring that back to you guys on that.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it was written down here, and so it seems like there actually wasn't a plan, and now there's activity to create a plan. So I think the need obviously is grown considerably across the state, and so I think action is warranted. So
Absolutely, it's picking up some speed, and we anticipate having something coming back soon.
Okay, so could this be added to the comment section, that the issue that there's the study on the homelessness, and also with the need for shelters and also bathing facilities, and there's, I'm hearing about the RVs now near the Target area. There's been some RV parking that all needs to be coordinated. So if we can add all that into the comment section.
Sure.
For that item. All right, thank you. Are there any further comments on this page, or shall we move on? Okay, so we are at lower income and special needs housing, strategy HE 5.1.2. I think we could probably update the 2018 numbers for the 2019 numbers from the Housing Commission for strategy HE 5.1.2.
Sure thing.
And then for strategy HE 5.1.3, the rotating homeless shelter, it says the city will continue to support the operation of a rotating homeless shelter program. How is that being done presently? Are we just donating money to another organization? How is this coordinated?
I'd have to look into it. I believe there was one at one of the churches on McClellan, but I am not 100% certain how the city exactly supported it. But we're happy to look into that.
I think we probably want to tie this strategy then with the previous strategy HE 5.1.1. They seem to be a coordinated effort.
Of course.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I would agree, there was a program proposed, which was car park and then a shelter, you know, on the Church of McClellan, St. Jude's. So, yeah, I think it's just in terms of elevating this from, again, I think this is a case where it is no action at this time, strictly on what's written, worth a review. I think that there was an enormous amount of opposition when St. Jude's presented that plan publicly, so the city needs to, take a position on that, I think.
So, policy HE 6.1, fair housing. The city will work to eliminate on a citywide basis all unlawful discrimination in housing with respect to age, race, sex, sexual orientation, marital or familial status, ethnic background, medical condition, or other arbitrary factors so that all persons can obtain decent housing. I am wondering how is this handled now? Where do these complaints go, and then how are they resolved?
One, I'm not aware of recent complaints on this particular topic, and two, we do have a housing division that manages the housing efforts. We do have consultants as well that assist us in these kind of matters, and it comes with the obviously legal assistance and services as well. Great,
thank you. And I have one question on strategy HE 6.1.1. There's $43,000 went to Project Sentinel, and I was wondering if someone knows a little bit about that project, what they're doing.
That is actually a consulting firm that we contract with to provide mediation and other services.
And so those are 2018 numbers. I was wondering if for 2019, did we also give that same amount? Okay, great.
So just a question on that. They're mediating between landlords and tenants generally in terms of disputes? Is
Yes.
that the? Thanks.
I suppose that brings up a question. So if you don't know of any disputes and we've paid the $43,000, I'm sort of wondering why we're doing that.
I will say that's good service paid, right? If it hasn't gotten to the level of our awareness, I mean, that's the point of having these services, is that they can sort of take care of these things. Sometimes even before they get too far.
Maybe the follow-up for that would just be, this is really more for, I think, the housing department, just to have a report of the actions, the casework.
The housing planner probably has that at her
Yeah, no,
fingertips.
I suspect
and
they probably do.
She will be at a future meeting and be happy to respond to those
I
questions.
mean, this Project Sentinel is across the Santa Clara County. It's basically legal aid, free legal aid for renters.
So we'll make a note of that. We'll make sure that information gets back to you. Thank you.
Great, super. Are there any more comments on this page, or we shall move on to policy HE 7.2?
Just a question on 7.3. How do we actually promote public-private partnerships? That's 7.3.
It's a little bit like the Verandas project, where we supported a development financially for an affordable housing development to be built. So it's mostly funding, technical assistance. If an affordable project does come through, then we would essentially support it by whatever means we can, encourage the use of density bonus to see how we can get the project built.
Thanks.
Okay. I do have a question on policy HE 7.2 in the comment. Staff is participating in regional coordination efforts with the upcoming RENA process with regional planning staff to represent local views. And I'm wondering if, what that looks like. Has that just been emails back and forth? Because we're expecting really big numbers. Has some concern been presented to MTC ABAG about this?
So, excuse me, we have been involved in, MTC and ABAG has been involved in outreach with the technical community in terms of planners and planning staff in different communities, and they've had workshops and study sessions and other things where we have provided input to the extent that they have come up with policies which affect our city. We have provided our input in terms of the community's concerns. We've passed those on, and verbally and some email. And so it's been an ongoing dialogue in terms of that particular process. And they're in the process of developing those policies right now at MTC and ABAG.
Okay, we'll get to this later on about the RENA numbers. There just seems to be, like, which you can explain, there seems to be some overlap between our numbers going from 2014 to 2022, and then we're getting new numbers this year. So when we get to that item, if you can explain how that overlap works, because it seems like we've got like 2 years where we've got old numbers and then new numbers coming out. So to see how that's going to work for us. And then on policy M 1.2, I was wondering if Wolf and Stevens Creek could be added on to the major intersections.
So these intersections are the CMP intersections, which are county-wide intersections that the VTA looks at and controls. The city does not. So major intersections include Wolf and Stevens Creek. The answer to your question is yes, it would include Wolf and Stevens Creek.
So let's just add it on there since we've got a major project going in, so that people keep that in mind. Okay. Are there any more comments on this page? We'll move on to policy M 2.1. I just had a general question under Complete Streets Strategy M 2.2.3. I was wondering if these are these in the heart of the city plan already? The develop urban improvement standards for arterials such as Stevens Creek and De Anza Boulevards. In these areas, standards may include wide sidewalks, tree wells, seating, bike racks, and appropriate street furniture. And I think, my question was, if it is in the heart of the city plan, is there enough depth for all of these items to be accommodated?
There is a 35-foot landscape easement from the back of the sidewalk along Stevens Creek Boulevard, which is adequate for a 10-foot planting strip, a 6-foot sidewalk, another 10-foot landscape strip, and then a 9-foot front setback for the first building to pop up.
And then for strategy M 2.2.4, develop suburban road improvement standards for all streets not designated as rural, semi-rural, or in the crossroads area. And I was wondering if we could add in pollinator pathways and the groundwater retention basins, if we could somehow incorporate that for our improvement standards.
So this is an example of, the section that's being commented on here that's actually in the approved general plan. So I don't know, is the content of the comment to consider that at such a time as the general plan is revised? Because you can't change that without a GPA, right?
Correct. We will take this up, we'll put it on attachment 2 as a comment from individual commissioners, and then the city council can consider whether they wish to open up the general plan to include those, all or any of those.
Okay, so we're moving on to the next page, beginning with policy M 3.2. If we have no comments on that page, we're on the next one, policy M3.9. And I really like that you've got the all-new via shuttle service added in. I think that's great. I do have a question, policy M4.4, amenities such as trash receptacles. And I think this probably will go into sustainability, where perhaps we don't want to be providing lots of public trash receptacles in the future. And, you know, we do even have some issue with our recycle bins that we're providing, given that it's not getting recycled. And I know that that's a problem for, you know, parks and recreation, you know, across the country now. All right, if there's no further comments on this page, we're at the next page, policy M5.2.
The two highlighted items here on this page, there's a reference made to work plan program, taking a look at, I guess, at TIA. So I'm curious if that's ongoing now, or?
That project has been kicked off, and my understanding is that the Public Works Department is working to put their plan together for outreach and bringing it to the Commission and City Council.
Thank you.
So we're moving on to the next page, policy M8.2. I do have a question on policy M8.4, where it says, require large employers, including colleges and schools, to develop and maintain TDM programs to reduce vehicle trips generated by their employees and students and develop a tracking method to monitor results. My question is, because it says require, including colleges, which means De Anza. So we're saying to require De Anza College to develop and maintain a TDM program, and schools, which to me means all of our elementary schools. And to my knowledge, we haven't required them to do this.
This is language from the 2005 general plan that got rolled into the 2014 general plan. I believe staff recommendation at the time was to strike language for districts and entities that the city does not have control over. However, it was brought back in 2015, I believe.
So we can't actually implement this. It's here, the language says that we're going to require it. It's like it's a shall item, but we cannot. That's correct?
That is my understanding, unless the city attorney tells us otherwise.
There may be nuances to this question we could look into, but I don't believe you could do that if you want a short answer.
So it's out of jurisdiction.
Right.
Yeah. So I would comment, although it is out of jurisdiction, that De Anza, of course, has a pretty aggressive, they have a ride pass program that's part of the things that the students have as part of it. So they actually, have implemented TDM, which is, good news.
And with the large employers, that really is only during new projects that's really enforced.
Okay, so if we could make a note that we cannot require the colleges and schools to do it, but we could mention,
Right.
what the schools
or-
provides, and the VIA, they're also doing that as well. De
Or
Anza.
can the wording be changed, strongly encourage schools and,
Sure thing.
right.
Split that out to require the colleges to be encouraged.
For strategy M 9.3.1, I was wondering if they made a decision on what type of intersection they would be using for the 280 and Wolf interchange. I was wondering about the diverging diamond, if that was selected, or if they went with a different alignment.
I'm not 100% certain which one they picked. I think there has been some progress made on that, but I don't know if there has been a final decision.
I think it became lower priority because the funding source for that, is not. So,
Okay, so we'll move on to policy M 10.1. And I have a question about policy M 10.4, roadway maintenance funding. Identify and secure new funding sources to fund the ongoing routine maintenance of roadways. It's more of a historical question. I was wondering if when Prune Ridge was sold, to my understanding, the city received $22 million and that went to roadway improvements. Is that correct?
My understanding is that money had to be used for roadway purposes because it was a roadway that was sold. So it would be a question that Public Works could definitively answer, but my understanding is that that is what it was used for.
And that might be why we have such a good pavement standard compared to our neighbors.
Correct.
Well, great. Okay, thank you. If there's no further comments on this page, we'll move on to policy ES 1.2.
Except for Mary Avenue.
I was wondering under energy sustainability policy ES 2.1, encourage the maximum feasible conservation and efficient use of electrical power and natural gas resources for new and existing residences, businesses, industrial and public uses. Is this completed because of the REACH code policies? I believe they were adopted by City Council.
I think it has to come back to council, so we're kind of still putting it as pending.
Okay.
And it wasn't completed in 2019 anyway.
Okay. Okay, if we have no further comments on that page, we're at strategy ES 2.1.3. And I was wondering under ES 2.1.5 if we have established a tree listing of larger canopy trees and do we have the ability to increase the box sizes that are being required for development? Is that something we can do, or do we have to go through and modify the municipal code and do that by ordinance?
In general, yes. The municipal code provides guidelines for what replacement trees should be. As far as new trees, when they are planted, the city has some discretion in requiring larger box size trees if that is the direction. Right now, our arborist says that the best trees that take to the soil and conditions that are native over there, 24-inch box between is probably ideal for the tree to grow in that space and thrive.
And also if we could look into accommodating the larger canopy trees and the natives. I know that we brought that up during the Parks and Rec master plan to work on that for shade. Under strategy ES 2.1.9, and this is regarding alternative fuel vehicles, I was wondering, this might actually make an interesting study session where we have some vehicle comparisons and education for the public. So it's not just electrical vehicles, but it could be the hydrogen vehicles or some other alternative. Okay, if there's no further comments on this page, move to policy ES 3.1. Okay, so I'm not going too quickly, am I? Everyone's good? All right, so we're moving on to strategy ES 3.1.4. Next page. I just had one comment under air quality strategy ES 4.1.1. I would like to see a comparison of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District air quality standards with comparable regions. And I'd like the city to take action as needed if we find that our standards are quite a bit more lax than other comparable regions. I'd like to know about that. And then for strategy ES 4.1.2 on dust control, if there's a way that we can require construction air quality monitors on projects that are over 100,000 square feet or have a potential hazardous materials risk, to have those put on site at, depending on how large the project was, so possibly like four monitors. And we can add that in the comment section, and that might be something that would go, again, as an ordinance.
I'm sorry, Chair, could you please repeat that last comment so I understand?
So it'd be, I believe this would be a municipal code ordinance requirement where if a project, and I'm just throwing this number out there, if it was larger than 100,000 square feet, that you would require air quality monitors. And then as you would also specify how many. So perhaps 4, if it was like a square piece of property, you would have one on each side. And so if it was over 100,000 square feet, or if it had a potential hazardous materials.
So are those just arbitrary numbers in general?
These are very arbitrary. It's just
Right,
to bring up the topic of having some
Right.
construction
So
air
maybe
quality
something
monitors.
that caveats that in terms of some level of engineering assessment of monitors required per size of project that would, picking them right. So
I would actually comment, similar to the prior comment, to study what the prevailing standards are for what is done in terms of monitoring and, understand whether we're consistent with that.
Okay, if there's no further comments on that page, strategy ES 4.2.1. This first item is to establish a citywide public education program providing information on ways to reduce and control emissions and continue to provide information about alternative commutes, carpooling, and restricting exacerbating activities on spare the air high emissions days. And I think one of the ways that can be done is if we increase the number of air quality monitors across the city and then educate the public on asthma and stroke due to air pollution, and particularly with stroke, since we have an aging population, the effects of air pollution, and then the necessity to be able to get to a stroke center in a timely manner. So that all falls under the education aspect. And then strategy ES 4.2.2, review and consider expanding the allowable home-based businesses in residential zone properties to reduce the need to commute to work. And I was wondering if there's some data behind this, requests for changing the allowable home-based businesses. Like I'm sure it came from somewhere. I was just wondering what kind of requests people have been making for home-based businesses, which they want. which aren't currently allowed. Okay, and I had a comment on strategy ES 4.2.3. We did have a project which was listing magnolia trees, which we felt pretty much unanimously that those were not drought tolerant, and I was wondering if the residential landscape list has been altered to have more drought tolerant trees on it so that we don't end up looking at magnolias, for instance.
Actually, I think that particular kind of change of the planting schedule, it may be in a different section rather than air quality, but, you know, with regard to native plantings and it's interesting because I don't think that the particular thing of native plant types is not something that I believe is actually directly addressed, or I could be wrong. So drought tolerant, I think did get touched on somewhere else here.
Yes, the water, it's further down this particular element. It talks about water usage.
Quick question on 424. Do we have, I mean, with sustainability now, do we have data now in terms of the, how much CO2 emissions the city is actually, and or cost for fuel by converting over half the fleet to electric and hybrid? Just curious of what the opportunity is, and then making a decision as to whether or not replacement at a faster rate would be warranted or not. So it's more of just a curiosity because.
Yeah, I will say that's a good question, and we'll have to coordinate with Public Works and
I
get
know, I
back to
didn't
you on
expect
that
you to have
one.
the answer, but I think it's warranted to at least assess the impact that we've had, right, so that we can take somewhat credit for that and determine whether or not, because I nowhere is it stated what the rest of the replacement schedule is and whether or not, because the fuel savings alone might warrant accelerating replacement, and then you'd get the CO2 savings at the same time.
My understanding is that there is a proposed item on the upcoming work program to update the city's cap, and all of this might be looked at as part of that. So stay tuned.
Could we add that part into the comments then for that item? Okay. I have a question about policy ES 4.3, discourage high pollution fireplace use. So it had been that they would encourage you, since my neighborhood has all fireplaces, and they would encourage you to put in natural gas. So what do we do now?
With the new REACH codes, I don't know what that's going to do. I have to be honest. I guess it might have to be electric, but I'll have to look back to see what would be required for that. But that's only in the event of a replacement. So I don't believe people would go in and actually require them all to be upgraded right now. But if you did come in for a permit, it would likely have to be electric. But I can find out more about that.
Right, because I was wondering, if you were going to incentivize people to retrofit their existing fireplace, because mine's still sitting as a fireplace, but I don't use it. So what I'm wondering for myself, what am I going to switch to? And natural gas is no longer the right choice. And I'm not sure what electric would look like either. And maybe there's something that's like really low emissions. I have no idea.
TV set playing a picture of a fire, actually. I would just comment that, I tried to read what it was that they were, what the proposal was for the REACH codes, and it looked to me like the only thing that was explicit in the council packet was that they were going to, not make, you couldn't have a gas fireplace. It wasn't clear what was happening with the rest of the appliances in the house from the report, which I guess that's coming back at some point. So I guess I get a chance to try to figure it out again. I hate to back up, but back on page 45, this is item 2.1.2. I was trying to decide whether to mention it or not. There's a comment about the sustainability division, and I'm not sure that the comment doesn't really seem to make sense there. It looks like that's trying to encourage replacement of existing appliances. I'm not really sure that's what they're doing. So my only comment is to take a look at that comment and make sure that's in line. They certainly are making this recommendation for new construction, right? And as embodied in the REACH code recommendation. It's just a comment. And that's effectively the same comment as the fireplace.
And that's ES 2.1.2.
That's right.
Okay, noted, thank you.
Yeah.
So I believe we're at ES 5.2.1. Page 51. And you're right, so we do have the native plants. Continue to emphasize the planting of native, drought-tolerant, pest-resistant, et cetera, plants. It's just saying emphasize.
So in a private residence, how much influence does the city have with regard to plant selection?
On private residences,
Yeah.
I guess if it's a brand-new house, they would have to comply with the city's landscape ordinance, which has requirements for native. I believe you could streamline your application if you have at least 80% of your plants be native, drought-tolerant.
Mm-hmm.
It does allow up to 20% of the plants to not be a native and/or drought-tolerant.
And a re-landscape?
For single-family homes, you are not required. There is no,
Okay.
requirements that are apply.
Well, the city had also had to remove the grass incentive as well. So I think there's actually been a lot of activity in that area, which is good.
Okay, so we're moving on to policy ES 5.6. So when would you like us to take a break and take public comment?
Well, I was thinking, kind of stay true to what we've been doing last year. I think somewhere around 8:30, 9 o'clock, and take a quick 5-minute break. You could entertain public comment at that point before you take a break, and then we can reconvene and decide how much more we have left and how we want to proceed.
Okay, so we have about 35 minutes we're going to go, and then we'll take public comment. There's one item here, policy ES 6.1, which I don't think it's written strongly enough. It says cooperatively work with Santa Clara County to ensure that plans for restoration and mining operations at Lehigh, Hanson, and Stevens Creek quarries consider environmental impacts and mitigations. I think the word consider kind of bothered me. I feel like they, should have to adhere to any requirements of that end up coming out of the EIR. Because they're trying to expand, and with the mitigations that they're mentioning here. And then the next one, again, it's the same with the language. It's not very strong. So strategy ES 6.1.1, public participation. It says encourage Santa Clara County to engage with the affected neighborhoods when considering changes to restoration plans and mineral extraction activity. I'd like to add the word strongly. Strongly encourage them, or it'd be great if we could require them, but just something a little bit stronger here, considering what the quarries are planning. Okay, if there's no further comments on that page, we're at strategy ES 7.1.1. So with strategy ES 7.2.1 lot coverage, it says consider updating lot coverage requirements to include paved surfaces such as driveways and on-grade pervious patios to incentivize the construction of pervious surfaces. And I'd like to see that updated. It says no action's been taken. And I know I mentioned this, I believe it was in the last Planning Commission meeting. You know, you've got a huge difference between the runoff coefficient if you have a paved surface versus grass, and I would like to see the lot coverage requirements to include the paved surfaces like they're mentioning here, and see if we can move that along, because it's suggesting that we do it. So that would be something that would be a municipal code change. That would be in a new ordinance in order to do that. And so I'm wondering, you know, if we could have a study session on this and just, you know, follow these directions, which they're saying to do this here.
Just a question on that. So the way this is written, says considering updating lot coverage requirements to include paved surfaces such as driveways and on-grade pervious patios to encourage, to incentivize the construction of pervious surfaces.
It seems like it should say impervious patios.
Yes.
It might be a typo, and
Right.
I can double
Right.
check, but.
And then I would assume the counter to that was if you had pervious surfaces, they would not count. At least that's right.
Or count differently.
Yes, or count differently, right?
I mean, today there actually is a hardscape requirement, right, is there not? I don't think I can't put.
you can't pave over your whole lot.
The lot coverage is 50%, and lot coverage only includes your home and your eaves. It does not include the driveway. There is a front yard hardscape limitation depending on how wide your lot is, and that is, I believe it's 60% for lots that are less than 50 feet, and a little less for lots that are wider than that.
Right, but no consideration for pervious and impervious surfaces.
No.
Right.
In fact, if it was a pervious paver situation, it could be the whole front yard.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they use pervious concrete at Blackberry Farm and the McClellan Preserve, and it is unbelievably expensive. So,
Yeah.
you know, on one hand, it's great. It's great, and in particular, I think it's great that the city took leadership in really biting the bullet on the cost. But yeah, no, I mean, you know, if there is anything to discuss there, I mean, it would be interesting to look into if there's differentiation in the ratios for pervious and impervious surfaces.
Well, I think with regards to that path, what was interesting is that it's surrounded by landscaped area. So even if the water ran off, so the idea is that you're not going to have someone
Stormwater
completely
runoff, yeah.
pave their entire lot. But with regards to that pathway, the water would just run off to the sides and soak into the ground. So I saw that project, and I was wondering, and I had heard that it was very expensive as well, and I was wondering about if that was really a good use of those funds or not.
But it does sound like a business opportunity to figure out how to make affordable pervious surface material.
Well, I think that the cobblestones, the concrete pavers count as pervious. Is that correct?
Do
Correct.
they?
Pavers do count as
really?
pervious surfaces.
Because there are.
As long as they're not set on concrete.
Okay.
As long as they're set on
Right.
some
That's
sort of a
interesting
base.
because there are pervious pavers and non-pervious pavers in terms of the paver itself, and generally upon installation there is kind of a sealing process. So while they're considered pervious, they're not that pervious, I guess is the point I'm trying to make.
Okay, so we're moving on to policy ES 7.3 on the next page, which is 54. And I was wondering if we could add a note perhaps to strategy ES 7.3.1. We had a presentation talking about the green infrastructure to mitigate pollutant loads and flows, and they had mentioned having something along Mary Avenue and using a grant, and then it was also suggested that Lawrence Expressway might be another area if we were to get the Lawrence Mitty Park, so that the runoff off of Lawrence Mitty could, be able to just basically soak into the ground there using these design methods. So if we could add Mary Avenue and Lawrence Expressway as possible areas for the stormwater treatment system. Are there any other comments on this page? Then we're moving on to 55, policy ES 7.6. Okay, so I had an issue with policy ES 7.9. Continue to coordinate citywide water conservation and regional water supply problem-solving efforts with Santa Clara Valley Water District, et cetera. And there's a comment further down which will address this maybe a little bit better. But the question is does the city support a % of the tertiary treated water be required to be for groundwater recharge, as opposed to having it all go for landscape irrigation? And it's a policy that, if you look at some of the items that we have further down, it's as though the city already made a decision that, yes, it's okay that we're going to use this expensive tertiary treated water for irrigation, and we're not going to consider groundwater recharge, which then ends up pumped out and being used for drinking water. So I'm going to just throw that idea out there, and it'll come back in a couple of items. Anyway, if there's no further comments on this page, we're moving on to 56, policy ES 7.10.2. Okay, if there's no comments, we're on page 57, and this is where the two items are mentioned. So you have strategy ES 7.11.3, recycled water system. Continue to work with water retailers to promote and expand the availability of recycled water in the city for public and private use. And strategy ES 7.11.4, encourage and promote the use of recycled water in public and private buildings, open space, and streetscape planting. So, the question is, and I think probably this should be done at city council level, is having a study session about the tertiary treated water, how expensive it is, how much is being provided, where are the sources for it, and should it go to, do we want it to go for groundwater recharge because we have an expanding population which is going to need drinking water, or do we want it to go for irrigation? For instance, it's being used at Apple Park, that's 176 acres, and then we have some other areas which want to use it for irrigation as well. So I think it's a valid question, especially given how expensive it is.
You'll get more blue cards on that hearing than any other one that you could possibly.
Well, I'm curious why, Commissioner Fung.
I think that's a common thing when there's discussion about what you do with the output from the Advanced Purification Center that's in Santa Clara, that,
Is it healthy enough to drink?
Yeah.
That question?
yeah.
Right. I assume, Commissioner Moore, your comment on percolation is the filtering through percolation would eliminate that fear?
That's right.
Well, it's-
Percolation does. Although you actually see people complain about that as well with
Right.
landscape irrigation and
Right.
salt contamination and things
Yeah.
like that. But, it's the future.
Sounds like it would be a very good discussion.
My understanding is the water district wants the lines to run all the way back to their perk ponds in San Jose. And so this would be an opportunity for the city to capture some of that water along the way in Cupertino. So I believe that is the water district's plan, is to run piping somehow to get it from the plant up to their perk ponds in San Jose.
Okay, so we are on page 58, strategy HS 1.1.1.
What's LHMP?
It's the local hazard mitigation plan.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add a comment on policy HS 1.2. And while it does say ensure all areas in Cupertino are adequately protected for the anticipated effects of sea level rise, I think probably our greater concerns are the areas on the bay, which would include our sewage treatment facilities and some landfills, which would be subject to the sea level rise.
So that's a regional issue. Does that, is it more informational or awareness or?
My understanding is that Plan Bay Area is looking at that. It is looking at all these different resiliency strategies for how it protects areas of growth, and and some of them include seawalls or
Right.
Other levees and things like that to protect that infrastructure.
Okay, so we're moving on to page 59, policy HS 2.2. I have a question on strategy HS 2.2.1. Review options to provide functional and seismic upgrades to the EOC facility at City Hall or explore alternative locations for the EOC. Has this decision been made by City Council yet?
So I have to admit that I recently got updates on all of these strategies related to the health and safety element, and I can verbally tell you what those are. They are looking at making some upgrades to the service center, and they believe that might provide some sort of alternative in the interim for the EOC at the service center. But in the meantime, they're looking at alternative financing mechanisms for upgrades to the City Hall and have a more permanent EOC in City Hall in the future.
And the service center is at the 280 and 85?
It is
It's
at
that yard?
at Mary and 85. Yes, yeah.
Okay. Great, thank you. I have a question regarding for emergency preparedness. We have some blank comment areas, and I think that is just a section which needs to be filled in.
I just got those, and I
those.
have a version of this
Perfect.
document with comments, and it is pretty comprehensive. There, just so you know, there are lots of community groups that support the city in the emergency preparedness. There's CCC, there's CARES, there's American Red Cross. So there's lots of coordination that occurs in all of this. One example in the comments was of the power shutdown in October, when there was a lot of canvassing that occurred in the city, and that was with the aid and support of our volunteer groups as well, in addition to city staff. So there are a lot more comments that don't appear here right now.
So it says responsible department, city manager, and emergency services. That doesn't. I don't think this is so much of a planning commission, but maybe public safety commission group of items. Also, is that really more who would be looking at these than planning commission?
That's part of their work program. They look at that continually. This is the general plan annual report. Some cities only report on the land use policies to planning commission on their way up to city council. And so we're doing the whole set here.
Great, great. Okay. I have a question on strategy HS 3.3.1, create an all-weather emergency road system to serve rural areas. I'm just unfamiliar with that term.
I think this really pertains to the hillside roads, to make sure that they're safe during storm events, and the roads are not don't get too slippery and things like that, so that they're navigable during a storm or heavy rainfall.
Great. So if there's no further comments, we are up to page 61, policy HS 3.4. I did have a question on strategy HS 4.2.1, encircle neighborhood parks with a public road to provide visual accessibility whenever possible. I think they mean for the sheriff to be able to essentially be able to drive around the perimeter of a park.
Just have eyes on the park, whether it's the sheriffs, it's the public, just to make sure that it's not walled off by fences and other things, so that it's open to everybody.
Okay, so one park that came to mind is Creekside Park, for instance, and the way it's designed, you actually can't see one of the children's playgrounds because it's behind the main building. So ideally, it would have been, designed a little bit differently so that if they wanted to have that visual accessibility, that would have happened. And then I think Wilson, possibly you could build a perimeter road, but it might start conflicting with the baseball fields. I'm not sure about that. But most of it is visible from the outside.
This is really for new parks. So, or when there's a retrofit at an existing park, when they redesign the whole park, it's, those comments can certainly be passed on to the Parks and Rec implementation piece of their master plan.
Okay.
Just a quick question on 3.4. How does the city discourage the use of electronic gates?
There's a fence exception requirement in order to get a gate in the flat portions, the valley portions of the city. They're only allowed for demonstrated security and safety reasons. For example, there has been repeated break-ins or repeated unsafe activity at your property, and that's the threshold for receiving a fence exception to put in security gates.
But they are allowed in the hillsides.
They are allowed in the hillsides because they do have very long driveways, and they're very isolated up there. So it's been a quirk in the municipal code for a very long time.
I was going to comment, Vikram and I can attest to the fact that one of the things you have to do is you have to have a design review committee often when you have an electronic gate.
Yeah, like the one off Industrial. I remember that one.
Okay, we are moving on to policy HS 4.3, page 62. I have one question of policy HS 4.3, recognize fiscal impacts to the county sheriff and city of Cupertino when approving various land use mixes. And I think this would end up in environmental review in your CEQA documents because you have a public safety portion. And they might even give a dollar amount. I might have seen that in the past. So this is a question.
So we do require as a standard condition of approval for certain uses that if the sheriff receives more than the expected number of calls, for example, if you had a late night activity and the sheriff was repeatedly called out to that particular site, we can actually bill separately for those extra calls that the sheriff has to make to that particular facility. So that is a standard condition of approval, and this is how we kind of get to that point of requiring those additional dollars so that the city doesn't fall on the,
I think that's also been a regular thing we see with the larger applications where, in addition to the fire department reviewing it for access, the sheriff's department will review it for, will this be incremental calls? I definitely remember seeing that, like Main Street had that, and a number of the other projects have had that
Correct.
analysis.
We have to look at it as part of the fiscal impact analysis as well. In general, though it doesn't show that always, but it is something that we make sure we evaluate as part of the process.
Okay, if there's no further comments, we are moving on to page 63, Strategy HS 5.2.3. I do have a question for policy HS 6.3, ensure that projects meet federal and state standards for EMF emissions through development review. I know there is some concern about cell towers. Would that fall under this?
Yes.
Okay. And is this a topic where we want to conduct a public forum and discussion about the cell towers and the 5G network? Have some experts weigh in on it. I know there's health concerns that people have brought up.
It's a big can of worms. Should that be a TIC item or public safety or?
It is generally a TIC commission item. The FCC is pretty clear about what our role is in the for cell tower approvals. As an educational item, that's a separate bucket, but generally the TIC commission is the one that kind of looks to the technical piece of it.
So is this something where we could suggest a public forum be held by the TIC commission and for public education? Bring that up.
I think that would be part of their normal hearing anyway, but, but having an informational thing, that might be different than what they would do. You should schedule that the same day as the aquifer recharge.
Well, that would probably go to sustainability as well, I think.
The water, yes. Yeah, curious, have FCC guidelines with regard to 5G networks really, I haven't been privy to any information on that front.
We'd have to look at that, and the RF engineer would conduct the study and tell us what those standards are.
Right. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, but the approval status for microcell towers is different, right? That's already been enacted by the council.
Certainly, yes. Yeah. That's a different process.
Okay. With regards to policy HS 6.4, educational programs, it's sort of, I'm getting into the weed control here with regards to Roundup, and if we could be, maybe this is another sustainability type question, if we could have some suggestion of alternative weed control. I know weed abatement has been a big issue with City Council recently, so that we don't end up on the weed list. What else can we use besides something with I believe it's the glyophosphates that, or goats, yes, urban farming. But if we can have some alternatives suggested, because, I was just looking at some online, and it was like a mixture of borax and vinegar and, some dishwash soap, and then I was reading that even if you go put that all where, it'll kill the weeds, but it's also not very good for the surrounding area either. So I'm not really sure what the right solution is, other than hiring somebody to pull all these weeds. So anyway, if there was something that we could, be given some alternative, so that we can comply and not be putting more hazardous waste into the ground. Okay, so we're moving on to page 64. And I only have one comment on noise policy HS 8.1. Use the land use compatibility for community noise environments chart, the future noise contour map, and the city municipal code to evaluate land use decisions. I just wanted to make sure that both the community noise environments chart and the noise contour map were in the general plan, because I don't know that the recent version has both of those items. I think you maybe just have the future noise contour map, but not the land use compatibility chart.
It's in there.
Last time I saw it, it was broken up. I could find it in the the earlier one, the 2005, but it wasn't, they weren't like together. So I would like to see them, side by side in the general plan, just to make it a little bit easier.
Yep, we'll confirm. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we're moving on to page 65. And the only thing I can think of is policy HS 8.6, evaluate solutions to discourage through traffic in neighborhoods through enhanced paving and modified street design. You have recently done speed bumps in an area. So, I think maybe as a comment, you could mention those improvements and how that's working. I believe it's like just west of De Anza Boulevard and north of Stevens Creek. There's a neighborhood in there with new speed bumps.
Just because I use that street, they actually are well designed. So just from a feedback standpoint, in terms of promoting a speed that's reasonable, as opposed to completely stopping. Because if a speed, so I'm just gonna throw all this crap out there. If a speed bump is too sharp and requires a car to slow down to say 5 or 10 miles an hour, you're actually, in terms of emission and noise, it's not going to help, because now the car has to accelerate from 5 miles an hour back to 25 or 30 or 35, depending on the speed limit, versus those speed bumps, 25, they're good at controlling to 25. So kudos to David.
He'll actually talk about the speed kind of hump design or speed bump, and it's actually a very interesting discussion. Yeah.
So anyway, I think it does what it's supposed to do, and I think it's not irritating drivers.
Thank you. We'll pass it along.
I have a question on policy HS 8.7. Work to carry out noise mitigation measures to diminish noise along Foothill and Stevens Creek Boulevards from the quarry and cement plant trucking operations. And I was wondering if this has happened, and if it did happen, is it working?
This is an ongoing implementation item, so the sheriffs are out there, they issue tickets, they I mean, really, that is so they are the ones that regulate the truck speeds. They also make sure that the trucks are not out there when they're not supposed to be.
Right, I think they're regulating the use of air brakes as well.
Right.
Okay, we're going to go 5 more minutes, and then we'll take public comment. So we are on page 66, Strategy HS 8.7.2. And I only have one comment on this page, Strategy INF 1.1.1. Ensure that CIP projects reflect the goals and policies identified in Community Vision 2040. And perhaps just in the comments, if we could mention park equity, because that was an exception that we found when we reviewed the CIP last year. And if anyone has any comments on that page? Okay, so we're moving on to 67. Okay, and this is where you have policy INF 2.5 and strategy INF 2.5.1, where the tertiary treated water concept, kind of fits in better. And with regards to recharge, the policy could also, if people were willing to entertain it, be how much of that tertiary treated water would be available for recycled use and how much would go to groundwater recharge. And I think it probably is a sustainability question.
I mean, this item as it sits is actually more related to bringing purple pipe, the kind of Wolf Road project, that kind of thing. I think is what the intent was.
Okay, so we have 3 more minutes. Let's move on to page 68. Any comments on page 68?
My only comment was a minor one. Let's see, INF 4.1. There's actually kind of no comment on that, and you get it on the next page, which is about the storm drain. What's it called? Yeah, the storm drain funding plan. So it's a comment that could probably be updated.
Right, because it's completed, right. Okay, so we're moving on to policy INF 4.2 funding, and we're just suggesting that you update the comment on that page. So are there any further comments? And we'll move on to page 70. With regards to policy INF 6.3, encourage new and innovative technologies and partner with providers to provide the community with access to these services. One thing that comes to mind was the idea that we would be having the air quality monitors also on these 5G towers. And this is a TIC commission question, just to add, how much new technology they plan on incorporating in the 5G network rollout.
Wait, did you say air quality monitors on the towers? Is that what you? Sorry.
Yes, yeah. I went to the TIC commission. There's quite a bit of new tech that they would be rolling out with the 5G. That's potential to, they're calling it the Internet of Things. And
Sure. But what does that have to do with air quality? Just curious.
That was one of the items that they were talking about, is adding air quality monitors along with it. And that you would have air quality monitors throughout the city.
Okay, just as another point of having air quality monitoring? Not that the 5G network had an impact on air quality? Right?
No.
Okay,
Not
all right.
that.
Yeah, I think that stuff is all bundled. They call it smart city, the way
Sure.
you use it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've made it to 8:30, and we are going to take public comment. Our first speaker is Jennifer Griffin.
Good evening, Planning Okay, thing. Good evening, Planning Commission. I always learn a lot listening to these discussions. And on, I think it was section 5.1.3, if I wrote it down correctly, I was just going to make a comment that the rotating homeless shelter, that has been actually ongoing. I think that was West Valley Community Services, and I think even back 15 years ago, that was a very active program. I think there were 5 to 7 churches, or I think it was mainly churches, houses of worship, that were providing facilities, obviously on a rotating basis. And I don't know how active it is now, but it has been in the past, and it certainly was a very, very good program. And I think that type of thing, historically, houses of worship, temples, etc., have been locations where people can find refuge. And having this type of a situation, I think, is a very, very good thing. Everyone can agree on that. And that was something I think West Valley Community Services may have been working with other county agencies with this. I'm not sure about the funding, though, for that. And the other one was when they were talking about the noise. I'm not sure which section that was in there, but I don't know if they were talking about the airplane noise. I think we keep going to I believe City Council keeps going to the meetings from the airport, and it's been problems in the past where we've had planes flying over. I haven't noticed as many issues now, but in the past, we have had like flights at 3 a.m. I've noticed it also in Santa Cruz, there in the county. There is a lot of airplane noise. This was, I believe, a year ago, last fall. So I think this is something we probably should put into the general plan if it was not, because if you're trying to sleep and you've got constant noise from airplanes going over, I grew up with the Moffett Field traffic going over. I'm used to it. It's had issues in the past. It's much better now. But I think that we, particularly with the airport situation around here, we need to probably put that in as an ongoing potential issue because it may start up again. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Our next speaker is Lisa Warren.
Hi, I just wanted to go back to Strategy ES 5.3.1, just to highlight that it does not include trees, and Chair Moore wanted trees, and it was, anyway, if trees are meant to be there, or if they need to be in their own section, I think that still needs to be addressed. And I'm not sure which, it just says plants and ground cover. It says plantings and then plants and ground cover. It says nothing about trees. And typically, I don't think plantings include trees in the municipal code stuff, but I'm not sure. But, and I want to, I don't know which instance you were talking about, Commissioner Moore, when you said something about the magnolias. I remember being here and there was a lengthy discussion about strawberry trees, and just in general, the residential privacy screening whole thing needs to be revamped. And I've been wanting to ask if that's going to happen, if it needs to be put on your agenda or City Council's agenda, or where it starts, because everyone agreed that was a problem. And then Commissioner Fung mentioned too that his history has shown that balconies are an issue, which also came up in that same discussion. So However, those get on an agenda, and I don't know where or if balconies and the like are in this program at all. But there you have it.
Wasn't there discussion about that with the zoning and second-story additions and all of that kind of together? I thought that was part of that discussion, or could be anyway, incorporated in the same thing.
That was something that the commission recommended as a work program item.
So for ES 5.3.1, is there any reason why we can't add trees onto this item, perhaps in the comment section? Just to be, particular about it so that it's not just plants and ground covers, but we also add native and drought-tolerant trees as well. That seems like a fairly easy addition.
Sure.
Okay. And then I have a question on 5.1.3 regarding the rotating homeless center. It's the funding question. And if anyone can tell me what page that's on, I'd like to take a look. Because maybe we want to add that into the comment section, is what kind of funding we're providing. It looks like it's page 37. And if there's something we could add in the comments about, how much funding have we provided, and are we supporting West Valley Community Services for this? And if also under the BQ zoning, are we providing some support for the churches which are doing this, or not? Is the church having to take care of it all on their own? So that was strategy HE 5.1.1. It says that the city will continue to facilitate housing opportunities, but does this facilitation mean that we're providing funding for these churches or not? That could just go into the comment section, it's more like a research item.
Yeah, we'll take a look and follow up.
Yeah, I think that may actually be driven by were an organization to come forward and ask for money. Was it
Generally,
being
those
granted?
would be grants and
Yeah.
other funding.
I mean, that certainly would be the case for the rotating homeless shelters. That I don't think that the city is reluctant to do it. It's just somebody has to organize that and come and ask for money.
Right, and we'll research that and put that in the comments.
So would that be the CDBG funding? Is that the only pool that it could come from, or is there some other source?
It could also be the BMR AHF funding as well for temporary shelters.
We are up to page 70, and we need to go to page 77. Did you want to keep going, or did you want to take a 10-minute break?
That's entirely up to you, Chair. We're here all night.
All night.
Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break. 5-minute break, and then we have just 7-8 pages left. Great. Thank you.
You mean we have 7 pages left, right?
7.
7, okay. So for the record, it's about 8:40. We'll be back at 8:45. Thank you.
Welcome back to the Planning Commission review of the general plan. And we are at page 71. If you have hung with us through all of our review, we are going down to the wire of about 183 pages of general plan strategy and policies. And thank you for hanging with us. So we are on page 71, Strategy INF 8.1.2. If anyone has any comments on this page. Okay, hearing no comments, moving on to page 72. I'd like to just point up Strategy INF 1.2.2, explore increasing the parkland standard to 5 acres per 1,000 residents as part of the Citywide Parks and Recreation Master Plan. And I see that it's highlighted yellow. Is that what we're working towards? Because in parts of the city, we haven't met the 3 acres per 1,000 residents.
I think that'll have to be looked at with the Parks Master Plan. I believe the 3 acres is a citywide boundary. It doesn't apply neighborhood by neighborhood, but that is something that's going to be explored with that Parks Master Plan. And if it is not, then council will direct some other future action on it.
So, I did serve on the Parks and Rec Commission. This particular item is something that it's a long-standing thing. It's one of the alternatives that's offered in the original Quimby Act. So I think it just appears there because that was something that was, regulatory.
It's sort of an aspirational goal, really. Once we hit the 3 acre per 1,000 mark, that's when the city has the ability to look to increase our park acquisition strategy to be 5 acres per 1,000.
And I believe that of course it varies as the population goes up, but the current number is actually pretty close to, it's just under 3, so.
Yes, I believe there are some county parks and other things. If you incorporated those, it kind of tips it over, but it doesn't quite get the city's own inventory to up to 3.
Right, and that really gets into where the distribution of the parks, are throughout the city. So I was wondering if we can just put in the comment section that we have the ongoing Parks Master Plan, which would be addressing this, and along with that, that plan should have park equity maps. I believe it does. Some additional maps were put in there to address the park equity across the city because that is an issue.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the other points in, it's the next page.
So did you want to move on to the next one or finish a couple on the bottom here?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So strategy RPC 2.1.1, new developments in areas where parkland deficiencies have been identified should be required to dedicate parkland rather than paying in lieu of fees. And I don't know, there have been some changes to the municipal code regarding parkland. My preference would be that instead of should be that it's more definitive language that they are required to dedicate parkland. And I don't know if the municipal code was changed recently to reflect that or not.
I believe developments that are 50 units or less are not required to dedicate land. They are, I believe, under state law, the only thing that we can require are in lieu fees. And for any developments over, so this kind of addresses all kinds of developments, so it's more general than the municipal code is.
Oh. And then strategy RPC 2.1.2, I was just curious if you happen to know which schools are not under shared agreements for public use. I think it was Sedgwick and another school.
It's Fremont Union High School District doesn't have a sharing plan with the city.
Thank you, Commissioner Fung.
And are there some Cupertino Union School District schools? I thought some of the elementary schools were not shared.
We can find out more, but I believe all the elementary schools were part of it. But there might be restrictions on how much, though, of it where it was available to the public. But we can certainly look into that.
Right, okay, because I think Sedgwick comes to mind. I'm not sure about that. Strategy RPC 2.1.3, explore acquisition of surplus school and agency properties for parkland. Take advantage of the Naylor Act to purchase surplus school sites. To my knowledge, no, this hasn't been looked into, and I was wondering what the Naylor Act actually allows the city to do.
I'm sure a city attorney knows more about the Naylor Act than I do, but with that said, this has not been an issue in the past 2 decades or so. I believe back in the 80s there were several school sites that were acquired by the city that were then redeveloped. Hoover Park comes to mind. There's a Three Oaks Park, which was also part of a surplus school, is my understanding. It was an elementary school back down there. There's also Wilson Park used to be a school. So there were a bunch of parks that were acquired by the city, and then portions of that site were sold off for housing, and then the rest was developed with a park. So when you look at Hoover Park, there is a section that looks like 80s type housing. You can tell when you look at parks by the type of development that kind of fronts it, whether it used to be a school site acquired by the city or not.
But I think in general, the Naylor Act just allows school districts to sell surplus property. So in general, that's.
So it's not the city doesn't have a by right, if it's not being used by the district, that they get to acquire it. It has to be the school district.
They have to act upon it in
willing.
order to put it up for sale.
Okay, thank you.
So I actually live in one of those houses in the Hoover Park area. And so there were a number of them, Jollyman as well. There were a number of schools which were, the school site was sold off and the playfield became a park. I think actually, that with regard to the shared use agreement, I think when you go back to look at that, you may actually look, the schools in Cupertino probably all are covered. The CUSD doesn't have a department that does, it's grounds maintenance on that scale, but that may be different for the schools that are not in Cupertino.
Correct. That could very well be.
And in terms of the high school not, is that just driven by?
They just don't want to.
They just don't want to.
Yeah.
They have a lot of after-school programs that they run, and they just don't want the public in there at those times.
That's another one of those historical, one of the top priorities for the Parks and Rec department has been, try to get more swimming pool capacity, more tennis courts and things like that. And those, there's a natural opportunity there, but it's just not something that works for the high school district.
Okay, so we are moving on to page 73. I believe, Commissioner Fung, you had a comment on this page, something?
Yeah. Let me see. Oh, it was, yes, RPC 2.3 was what you were raising about the issue about distribution. So it actually just appeared a little bit later in the sheet.
Oh, right, because people were asking, when we were bringing this up before in the CIP, they wanted to know where in the general plan does it talk about parkland equity, and it's this policy, right? Okay, so moving on. Page 74, any comments? Well, I have a comment on strategy RPC 2.5.2. The city is considering the possibility of adding the Rancho Rinconada Recreation District facilities into its portfolio to be considered by the council in 2019-2020. Is this still in the works?
There have been some items on the agenda related to the Rancho Rinconada district. I haven't followed it very closely, but it is my understanding that there is an interest there. I just don't know what is happening to it just yet, but we'll find out more, and as it develops, we will go ahead and update the comment.
That's probably been on there for 20 years now, you know, ongoing discussion. And I think that they may actually be having a meeting right now, the Rancho Rinconada board. I think they're actually doing it right now. I got notice for it, but yeah.
And then I was wondering for this item if we could potentially add on updating the sports center to include a swimming pool and to rebuild the gym. That's, you know, that we do have a facility that could take care of some of these needs if it were to be rebuilt.
We're still on 2.5.2, right? You're
Right,
basically
right.
suggesting that they'd be reconstructed to accommodate additional facilities.
Yes, yeah. So it's explore the possibility of providing additional access to existing facilities such as gymnasiums, swimming pools, and tennis courts. So I don't know if it fits into this exactly. I'm not really sure where to put a gym and aquatic center into these policies and strategies, but if we could expand that, especially if we're going to have an expanding population, and considering we lost the Bay Club, which was a really large gym on the east side of Cupertino, and if there was some way that we could get something of an equivalent size or maybe even larger to replace that for the public, that's provided by the city and has an indoor aquatic center or something like that would be pretty exceptional. And one site that had been brought up was the United Furniture site that had gone on the market, which looked like it was large enough to accommodate a facility like that. But just looking in that down the road, especially we have an aging population and we have a growing population, and if we were losing these gym facilities and they're getting replaced with small boutique type gyms, that's really not going to serve the population.
I would just comment that I think that those are addressed in the scope of the Parks Master Plan. They go into great depth about trying to identify future needs for the kind of large structure facilities, and to look for locations as well.
Okay, so we could put it in the comments and say that it's going to be part of the Parks Master Plan then, so it's got a location for where it's being handled, so that we know that it's not going to be spearheaded by the Planning Commission. Kind of going back to a sustainability comment, and I think I might have mentioned this early on in this general plan review, but it had to do with the white solar and green roof policy. And my suggestion would be, as the city updates some of its facilities, if it were to have a green roof on one of the city buildings as a demonstration for the public. To my knowledge, we don't have any city buildings which have a green roof, and I don't know if we have solar on our facilities either. Does anyone know of any solar?
Yeah, the service yard on Mary Avenue has some solar as a for vehicles shelter, in essence.
Environmental Ed Center too.
Thank you. Yes.
Is that it though?
Those are the only two recent projects to build facilities.
Okay. Okay, so I believe we're on page 76. Are there any comments? I think we might be able to add for policy RPC 6.4 library services, the library expansion project. And if there are no further comments, we're on page 77, the last page. If there are any public comments, please turn in another card for this last 7 pages, and we can address them. And are there any comments for page 77? Okay, so we have no comments on 77. We've completed our review, and we have an oral communication on this topic.
I can't believe you guys got all the way through that. Anyway, it was always interesting seeing the general plan come out and looking at it. And yeah, the issue of the parkland, that's been an ongoing issue. Rancho Rinconada annexed in 2000. We came in with a site that had water tanks on it that eventually became Sterling Barnhart. And believe it or not, the park that was supposed to have been for the neighborhood was actually the, it's now called Sage Apartments, down at Stevens Creek and Calvert. That's an interesting historical fact. Now it's an apartment complex in the city of San Jose, believe it or not. But anyway, I think the one where they were talking about in areas that were deemed deficit in parkland, having projects that were like maybe large developments that were going into those areas or bordering them have to deed parkland. I think that that is an overwhelming, excellent strategy. This is the issue that we're sitting down with, particularly in the Rancho Rinconada area. Because of the urban villages down Stevens Creek Boulevard, the 2 apartment complexes that are at the northern end of Rancho Rinconada, which are Sage Apartments and Shadow Oaks, they are actually in the city of San Jose. They're zoned now, I believe, to 125 feet, that they could actually go to higher density. If there is a way, if that does happen, there is the potential that we could force San Jose, because they are loading people into that area. It's Cupertino address, but it's the city of San Jose. 2 of those were actually under rent control. They may still be. That there may be a way to force those property redevelopments to have to deed some of that property as parkland for the area. It is a potential control mechanism. So we say to San Jose, if you want to build up these properties, they could go zone to 10 stories. Believe me, I'm not looking forward to that. Calvert is no trot in the park right now. We could say, Cupertino could say to San Jose, if you want to do this, you have to deed some of that to parkland that is used by the residents of those areas and also Rancho Rinconada. Fair is fair. I think it's a weapon to keep modest growth in those areas. I am terrified that those apartment complexes are going to go to 125 feet high. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Do we have any further comments on our review?
I'll just say the chair you didn't get a chance to announce the speakers. That was Jennifer Griffin. Thank you.
So do we have any further comments on our general plan review? And then question for staff is, what are our next steps with this? And will you be coming back with this item?
We intend to present this item in March to City Council with all the comments that we've received from the Planning Commission. And with the chart, we'll update the chart that we had attachment 2 with the additional edits that the Chair Moore, you suggested that the council consider. We'll add those in and update that chart and then forward it all to the city council.
And so, in the HCD portion will go in the front of that?
So at the next meeting with the planning commission, is my understanding that the housing manager will come in and talk about the data portion of the HCD forms. And since we've already gone over the policies, it's up to the planning commission whether it wishes to go over those policies again, because that is also part of the submittal to HCD. And all of that will be sent on to city council.
Okay, so what do you mean about going over the policies again?
The housing element policies that the planning commission went over today, half of them today and half of them at the January 10th meeting, those are also part of the submittal to the HCD, just the housing element piece. But those comments are already, the planning commission has already commented on those, and we'll incorporate all of that and send it off.
Okay, but we have one last chance on
course.
those if we want to
Of course,
add
absolutely.
anything further. Okay, great.
And both of those will be presented to the city council in March, since the deadline to submit the forms to HCD is April 1st.
Wonderful, thank you. So we are moving on to new business, which we have none, and staff and commission reports.
No staff reports.
Any commission reports?
My only comment is we had some comments in open communication regarding density bonus. I think that they were mistaken in the point they were trying to make, but at the end of the day, what was being asked for was, that we ought to try to have a study session. So I'm absolutely supportive of that, to make sure that people really do understand what is entailed in the in the state density bonus plan.
I would agree with that. There was seemed to be a little bit of confusion over the use of the word BMR and density bonus for the units on one of the diagrams. So I did attend the city council meeting this past week, and that is my only report. Anyone else have a commission report? Then we are adjourned.
Thank you. That's Facebook Live. That's Facebook Live. What? I mean,